My name is Rich with Miranda Artisans, and I was recently approached by a builder and asked to modify these two sink-based drawers. Now, these drawers came from the factory with cutouts for plumbing, and this one I had previously modified because even with the cutout, it didn't clear the disposal. So I modified it to clear the disposal, and I think it works, except what he'd like to do now is to close in where it clears already so that he can increase his storage. And this one turns out is at the bottom of the cabinet and it clears all the plumbing anyway. So we're going to go ahead and put a new bottom and eliminate the cutout so that he gets maximum storage.
It may seem obvious to some of you, but I should mention that at least a partial dismantle of the drawer is necessary. I'm always surprised at how easily these factory dovetails come apart. Some of you might be thinking, why do a video on drawer box modification? And to that I would say, why not do a video on drawer box modification? No, actually I wouldn't say that. I get it. Drawer box modification is not the sexiest of projects. And unless you're sitting at home contemplating how to modify a drawer, this is probably not a big deal to you. But the truth is, I had this project before me and I had been contemplating uploading some content, and I thought this might be a good opportunity to practice and learn how to do it. So this is my first video and I hope you enjoy it. One of the more tedious things to do is to remove the nails or staples in the drawer bottom. And yes, by the way, I do need a new pair of diagonal cutters. I'm not sure what other folks do to remove pins, but it seems to me you're never going to get the pin out of hard maple. So usually the way I approach it is I wiggle them until they break off, because when they break, they typically break below the surface as opposed to trying to clip them with a pair of cutters. At this point, I'm cutting the material for the bottoms of the drawers. In some cases, replacing the drawer bottoms is not necessary, but in this case, because we're actually eliminating the cutaways that are there, it was necessary on both drawers to replace the bottoms. At this point, I had to remove the rabbet from what was remaining of the back of the original drawer. The manufacturer chooses to rabbet the bottom of the drawer into that back rail, which I suppose gives it a little bit of sturdiness, but they only use staples when they install the bottom, and I'm going to install the bottom with screws. Taking the time to rabbet each one of these turns and returns would be quite time consuming, so I think using the screws works. I'm not typically a person who cuts corners unless I can come up with a more efficient way that's just as good in the end, and I think you'll find the way I'm doing it works pretty well. A very effective way of squaring up any box that has two sets of parallel sides is to measure from corner to corner and then match that measurement the other direction from corner to corner. That'll give you a precise 90-degree inside corner. The next step here is to lay out the alterations on the bottom so that I can cut the bottom of the drawer so that it matches the alteration. And then I can use that shape to cut the parts to make up the back of the drawer box. As I'm getting ready to cut the bottom of the drawer to match the alteration to the drawer box, you notice I reach up towards the ceiling. Well, that's my dust collector control. It's a mechanical control
that I will be showcasing in my next video. I just finished putting glue on the dovetails, and I never know how much to actually put because, you know, you get squeeze out, it oozes out all over the place. You don't want to put too much, but then you don't want to put too little either. And so the next thing is I'm getting ready to put the bottom in, and you may have noticed this in the video. I actually scared myself because for a minute I thought I sort of did the whole thing upside down and backwards. Fortunately, that wasn't the case. After fitting the drawer bottom, the next step is to make up the parts that make up the back of the drawer. In this case, I had some parts left over from previously discarded drawers that already have dovetails on them. At this point, I'm just taking a moment to remove some of the glue from one of the existing joints. As you can see, I'm kind of struggling with it. It looks like my chisel could use a real good sharpening. I just didn't really feel like taking the time to do that right at this moment. Some of you might have noticed me removing tape from this particular part. As it turns out, this recycled piece from an old drawer box had an unfinished top edge. So I had to mask it off in order to spray it so that it would be finished. Notice how I paused for a second as I was getting ready to glue up the dovetails. Then I rolled the drawer box onto its side. It's so much easier to glue the dovetails if you turn the drawer box on its side and point the backs of the dovetails towards the ceiling. Then you can kind of roll the tip of the glue bottle right over each dovetail. The other thing is, and I'm so bad about this, you see how I take the paper and put it on the floor? Sometimes I'm lazy, sometimes I can't find a piece of paper around handy, and so I'll just let the glue drip. And it's so much easier if you just put some paper down. You don't have to get on your knees to scrub the floor. Certainly if you let it dry till the next day, then it's a nightmare. I like to use a number 6 screw when screwing the bottoms on drawer boxes. Because the sides of the drawer box are only 5/8 material and because maple is reasonably hard, in most cases when I'm doing cabinetry and the like, I usually use a number 8 screw, but in this particular case I'm using a number 6. It's a finer screw, less chance of a blowout, I think. You also might have noticed that when I'm screwing the bottom of the drawer, I put the screws quite frequent. It looks like I'm going between 3 and 3.5 inches apart, maybe a little more. But the reason I do this is because the 1/4 inch bottom has some flexibility. And when you're screwing something that's flexible, you don't want to give space in between the fasteners where the material can bend or warp and create a gap.
So for instance, if you were screwing two pieces together that were quite rigid, you could spread the screws out more and they wouldn't have to be as frequent. But in the case of a drawer bottom, I like to put quite a few screws. Unfortunately for drawer number 2, I didn't have any salvage drawer material that was long enough to span the back of the drawer, so I had to make it up from scratch.
If you're not familiar with the jointer is a machine that's designed to flatten wood surfaces. So if you have a piece of material that's either rough sawn or it's just not flat, it has a cupping or something of that nature, by passing it on the jointer, it will flatten it and get it nice and flat and smooth. So the other effect you can create with the jointer is you take the flattened side and you put it up against that fence, and then you can actually make another side flat and make it perfectly 90 to the first side.
As I just mentioned, the jointer can flatten a board that doesn't have a flat side. And it does that by indexing off the same side that it's flattening. What a planer does, which you see right here, a planer will make a second side that's opposite the flattened side, perfectly flat and parallel with that first side. And it does that by indexing off the side that the jointer flattened. Another thing about the thickness planer that's worth mentioning is that it isn't only used to flatten the parallel side of the jointed side. You could actually use it on a board that's already been dressed and already been flattened, simply to alter the thickness of an existing board. So if you had a board that was 2 inches thick and you wanted to plane it down to 1 inch or 3/4 of an inch, that also is a primary use of this machine. And finally, before we bring the piece of wood to the dovetail machine, we will rip it to width on the table saw. By the way, do you think it's hot in my shop? I mean, look at my shirt. Well, in the 2 weeks since I filmed this video, I actually installed air conditioning in the shop. What a pleasure it is. I don't know why I didn't do it a long time ago. Well, I know why I didn't. You know, it's not inexpensive. But anyway, now I have air conditioning. With some minor adjustments to my dovetail machine, the dovetails produced by the machine were precisely matching those of the manufactured drawer. I'm not exactly sure what it is about this dovetail machine that makes it my favorite machine. I mean, possibly because it's one of the few machines I have in my shop where you don't have to do the work. The machine effectively does all the work. It's not simply that, though. I've had this machine for about 35 years. It's made by a company called Omec, and I believe it's an Italian machine, but it's a real workhorse. It's so well made, and I just sort of get giddy every time I get a chance to use it. Naturally, because this piece was made from raw wood, it has to be finished. So prior to finishing it, I sanded it with 120 grit, and then I gave it 1 coat of sealer and 2 coats of lacquer. And so here's the finished product. I extended this bottom area in so as to increase the storage. And this one, we eliminated the cutaway altogether. Thank you for watching.